One of my favorite things about language is innuendo, and one of my favorite movies is Down with Love, which can be adequately described as innuendo incarnate. Down with Love is a 2003 rom-com by director Peyton Reed, who you may know as the director of Marvel's Ant-Man movies. It stars Renee Zellweger, Ewan McGregor, Sarah Paulson, and David Hyde Pierce. Stop! I have a very important disclaimer to make. I really like this movie. Down with Love is one of, if not my absolute favorite comedy movie. And I'm going to spoil the whole thing, including all of the plot and some of the jokes. It's not a very long movie, and if you watch it with friends or a significant other, you'll more than likely have a grand old time. It's packed to the brim with style, personality, innuendo, and incredible puns. And it's got one of the best twists in cinematic history, IMHO. That means I'm a hoe. My plan is to go through the whole plot of the movie, and then go back through some of its more noteworthy aspects. With all that out of the way, let's get into Down with Love. My experience is but one among many. I remember falling in love with Bioshock Infinite the first time I played it. The game's first moments see you taken to a lighthouse in the middle of a storm and, after ascending to the top, being launched into the sky. A mere layer of clouds separate you from the awe-striking sight of 1912 Columbia. 1962, New York City. Barbara Novak has arrived in town to publish her self-help book, Down with Love, meant to teach the women of the world that if they shift their focus to their own skills and pursuits instead of focusing primarily on relationships with men, they can finally achieve equality among men. Immediately struck by the dog-eat-dog nature of corporate life, Barbara meets her editor, Vicki Hiller.
We're gonna set up a photo shoot for the book jacket. And don't worry, there's plenty of time. The book doesn't come out for a week. 1 week. Oh my!
It's astounding that any woman in New York could grow so accustomed to corporate life, but how Vicki pulls it off is a total mystery.
Just take a deep breath.
Barbara and Vicki head up to have a meeting with the men in charge of Banner House Publishing. The conference scene is the best scene in the goddamn film. Of course, Banner House isn't interested in mass publishing Barbara Novak's book. This isn't your typical self-help book. No. This isn't designed to make women feel good about themselves momentarily, but ultimately feel unfulfilled enough that they continue to fund the self-help industry in perpetuity. No, Down with Love is about change that can be felt at the systemic level. Equality with men would put the men who are currently in power into a state of having slightly less power by virtue of having more potential competition. But the men of Banner House can't actually see that far ahead. They just don't like it because they think it's baloney.
By practicing the self-pleasuring technique that I've detailed in Chapter 7, entitled Up with Chocolate.
Sure, the sexism in this movie is cranked up to 11.
Entitled...
Vicki, excuse me. It's right behind you. Would you mind pouring me a cup of coffee?
Count me in.
Likewise.
Ditto.
None for me, Vicki.
Thanks, RJ.
I'll have a Sanka.
But to be fair, it was already at a 9. And speaking of 9s, we're swiftly introduced to Catcher Block. Ladies' man, man's man, man about town. Catcher Block is a journalist for No Magazine, the magazine for men in the know. Vicki is determined to get Barbara's book published, so she arranges for Barbara to sit down and chat with Catcher about it for the magazine.
I got you a cover story written by No Magazine star journalist Catcher Block.
Catcher Block?
But there's a roadblock.
You're fired.
No, I'm not.
Oh, yes you are.
Catcher's biggest block is also his biggest boon, Peter McManus.
NASA was throwing a luau. Unless you found Nazis hiding at your luau, you're fired. There were Nazis hiding at your luau. I knew you'd do it.
Your boss is not your friend. Unless your boss is Peter McManus, in which case, sure.
What would you say is the average length for most men?
How would I know?
Well, let me see yours again, then. We could measure. I'll get a ruler.
Better make it a yardstick.
By the way, this first conversation between Peter and Catcher is the best scene in the goddamn film. Catcher stands up Barbara multiple times, opting instead to fool around with flight attendants until eventually Barbara's had enough and calls off the magazine arrangement.
Goodbye, Mr. Block. Forever.
This occurs much to the dismay of Barbara, Vicki, and Peter, who really likes Vicki and stuff, you know?
This is the first time I've ever had to eliminate having a future with the man before we've ever even had the chance to have had a past.
Despite Vicki's best efforts, the publishing of Down with Love proves to be limited at best.
Just one? If somebody buys it, well then there will be none.
No. Doubleday also has one.
That is until a stroke of pure luck and Vicki gets the book promoted by Judy Garland? On the Ed Sullivan Show? Sales absolutely take off, and soon women around the world are learning to live with agency and autonomy. To the displeasure of the straight men whose world revolved around their complacency.
Husbands don't want their wives tailed anymore. They know if she's sneaking out now, she's just looking for a job.
Even Catcher Block feels the effects of the book. Barbara inadvertently becomes the most influential woman in the world, and as such, Catcher missed the opportunity for an interview.
About the worst kind of man, the kind every woman should avoid.
Catcher Block.
Now he mad. That's fine, cut. Catch hatches a plan to expose Barbara by getting her to fall in love the regular way and undo her credibility as a down-with-love girl level 3.
All women are the same. They all want the same thing. Even Miss Barbara Down with Love Novak, and I am going to prove it.
Meanwhile, Barbara laments that the resentment that her book has caused among men leads her to be, on the whole, undesirable.
Well, when it comes to not needing a man, you wrote the book.
My experience is but one among many. The sight of the city is breathtaking from a distance, but becomes mesmerizing once you get a chance to walk among its residents. Children laugh and play, gorgeous plants dot the turn-of-the-century architecture, the sky wraps everything in a perfect blue above the clouds. And though the rational person experiences Columbia knowing full well that it's the product of impossible engineering, something feels right. The residents call their city their new Eden, for exploring its streets is like taking a stroll through heaven itself. By chance, Catch catches Barbara at the dry cleaners and introduces himself as
Major Zip Martin.
posing as an astronaut with no clue what Down with Love or who Barbara Novak even is. She's immediately interested, but he establishes that he's not really comfortable with sex right away, and the two go out on lots of dates. Vicky and Peter give the whole relationship thingy a try as well.
The men who resent my success won't give me the time of day. And the men who respect my success won't give me the time of night.
If I had the chance, I would respect you and resent you night and day and day and night.
A few weeks pass, and Catch dispatches Peter to swap apartments for their dates, inviting Barbara for a home-cooked meal that Peter already prepared, and sending Vicky over to Catch's woman-snaring bachelor pad. The phone call leading up to this invitation is the best scene in the goddamn film.
You'd like to come?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes.
The dinner date goes exceptionally well, but
Major Zip Martin.
his refusal to have sex leaves Barbara in a state of sexual frustration, and she tries to dump him, but then he kisses her and she changes her mind. Personal note here, this does not fly in real life. If you try to manipulate people by forcing sexual or romantic acts upon them, you are an asshole. Vicky and Peter's date goes as expected.
Are those your parents?
No, those are Catch's parents.
Why do you have a picture of Catch's parents?
Let's listen to some music.
Actually, scratch that, nothing goes as expected. Vicky and Peter go to a beatnik club instead, but then it gets raided, so they invite everyone who is there over to Catch's place, and now it's a party. Okay, that's just the state of things now. Vicky invites Barbara over after her stressful date, but Catch has already gotten home, not expecting Barbara to be there, and she catches
Major Zip Martin.
fooling around. She storms out and he follows her, somehow managing to quickly fabricate a story about how he was bamboozled and drugged by No Magazine staff, and how he now realizes that he's ready to go to bed.
I've never been more ready to go to bed. Well, then let's get to bed. When I said bed, you thought I meant bed.
Or if she said bed, all I could hear was bed. Or if she said it's bedtime, all I could hear was go to bed, 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 go to bed.
Go to bed!
Back at the publisher's office, the executives have enjoyed the financial successes of Down with Love, but now they're not getting laid, so they decide it's Vicky who should get laid. Off? Woo! I am so fucking good at those! Barbara confides in Vicky that she's fallen in love with
Major Zip Martin.
and it would seem Catch's plan is falling into place. That is, until it's date night, and Peter unsubtly spills the plan to Vicky.
That Catcher Block is privately tricking Barbara Novak so he can publicly destroy her with one of his exposés.
But while she's making her way to confront Catch, who, to nobody's surprise, has developed feelings for Barbara, clumsily suppressing them for the sake of his plan.
You have an eyelash. What?
Sounded like you had a different accent.
Oh, that is funny.
Catch records Barbara, admitting she's fallen in love with
Major Zip Martin.
mid-snog. This is the part where I get into big spoilers, so once again, if you think Down with Love is the kind of movie you would enjoy, I highly recommend checking it out. Rent it digitally if you have to. Ready? Okay. One of Catch's girlfriends walks in and the jig is up.
Catch a block! You're getting sloppy.
Catch reveals his true identity, but then Barbara stops the tape recorder.
I'm not gonna admit that you got Barbara Novak to fall in love. Because I'm not Barbara Novak. There is no Barbara Novak.
Huh?
For the sake of brevity and to avoid copyright trouble, I'll summarize this bit. Barbara's real identity is Nancy Brown. She used to work for Catch as a secretary, but when she fell in love with him and realized she'd only be an accessory to someone like him, she quit her job and began to scheme. Writing Down with Love, pretending to be Barbara Novak, and the book's success was all part of a grand plan, every step calculated to make Catch fall in love with her for real, seeing that she's just as clever as he is, and then some. After a monologue that the Academy waited until 2020 to give Renee Zellweger an Oscar for, Catch concedes that her plan was a success and is head over heels. But Nancy realizes that it'd be foolish to give up being a role model after all the good her book has done for the world, so she decides that she doesn't want to be with Catch anymore and to continue to live as Barbara Novak. Catcher is torn up about it, but ultimately decides to twist his expose into a story about how falling in love with Barbara changed him as a man, hoping that that will be enough to convince her that he's still worthwhile. But in the time that passes between then and Barbara's reveal, she launches Now Magazine, the magazine for women in the now. And not only does she reveal the narrative of Nancy Brown before Catch can even pitch the idea, but all of the women working for No Magazine quit and get hired on at Now Magazine. Meeting with Barbara as a job applicant, it's clear that Catch is attached to Barbara, and he comes clean about how the experience shifted his whole perspective about love and relationships. She turns him down anyway, but as he walks out of Now Magazine's offices in defeat, she surprises him on the way, and they fly off to Vegas to get married. Vicky and Peter get together as well. The credits roll as a little duet between Catch and Barbara plays. That's the film. Let's talk about it. My experience is but one among many. I should have seen the signs. If I had just paid attention, there were so many clues. If I had given any thought to Booker's dream of New York being ravaged, the way you're forced into baptism before you're allowed entry into Columbia, the endless barrage of advertising and marketing, the mark on your hand which mimics a poster warning citizens to beware the false shepherd. None of these things made me give the enthrallment of Columbia or its captivating atmosphere a second thought. That is, until Jeremiah Fink stood up on stage and casually remarked, "Is that not the prettiest young white girl in all of Columbia?" Right away, it's abundantly clear that this movie isn't interested in using cliches as intended. Nearly every time it employs some kind of used and abused rom-com trope, it does so in a way that's so over-the-top it couldn't possibly be read as genuine. It also provides pretty solid commentary on gender roles and stereotypes, daring to display couples where both parties are ambitious business people in similar positions of power to one another. I wouldn't go so far as to say that all of the relationships depicted are healthy. Goodness knows it took a lot of deceit to make things work for the lead couple. But at the very least, it shows that monogamous relationships can be just as valid as ones that involve sex a la carte, as the film puts it.
Oh, I'm still flying friendly in the skies, but now I decide how friendly and when and with whom.
Though it seems the film puts those two things into something of a binary, where you have to choose one of the two lifestyles.
I'm sorry, Barbara, but I don't want to be a down with love girl anymore. I give up. I give in. I just want to be Mrs. Peter McManus.
It also seems to frame sex a la carte as like a sort of phase that people grow out of when they decide it's time to get married. I wonder if that's something that the film producers believe, or if they were just trying to stay close to the confines of 60s cinema. There's still work to be done when it comes to gender roles, too. The men of Down with Love aren't shown being emotionally open with one another, save for a few moments with Peter, which are delightful, but nonetheless played for a laugh, which isn't great.
He says I resent you for being a self-made man, as opposed to the son of a self-made man.
Meanwhile, the film's women are depicted as finicky, constantly unable to decide whether the Down with Love lifestyle is right for them, and mindlessly substituting chocolate for sex. I mean, same. But still. The highlights of Down with Love really are the innuendo, style, and continuity. I've showcased a lot of it here already, but god, do these writers know how to seamlessly weave double entendre into this movie.
As the owner of No Magazine, I had some pull with my staff.
Well, then go and pull your staff with one of your other writers. I'm not doing it.
At the risk of sounding like my mother, just stay perfectly still and let him get it over with.
And it's interesting that the movie is so full of sexual energy, despite never making any direct references to particular acts. Wrapped in a towel is the most nudity you'll see, and all of the dialogue dances around the idea of what's going on during intercourse without ever outright saying anything. Never any intrusive talk of other people's genitals or even pregnancy. The internet could learn a thing or two. You can already see by scrutinizing the cinematography, wardrobe, set design, and even some of the visual effects that the film producers knew exactly what kind of style they wanted and pulled it off with flying colors. And every time I rewatch this movie, there's some kind of continuity nod I didn't notice before. Like how Catch tells Peter about the key outside Catch's apartment, usually reserved for his girlfriends. Then, one of his girlfriends casually grabs the key before discovering Catch and Barbara going at it. Or how Catcher starts the film after having just come back from a job at NASA, and then he slips his NASA security badge into Peter's pocket, where Peter had just stored his glasses. And then later, when he meets Barbara at the laundromat for the first time, he's picking up Peter's dry cleaning, so he's handed a little bag of pocketed items, which includes the NASA badge and the pair of glasses, which he uses to tell his story, and also a pipe, because, pipes are just sexy. It's not a movie you have to watch lots of times to appreciate, though there is plenty of subtle foreshadowing and fun continuity to make a second viewing worth your while. I think part of why it resonates with me is because it's a good deal more accessible than most movies about sex and relationships tend to be. It might not be deep, but it's fun. It's just a low-stakes thing that you can experience and have a good time with if you want. And I kind of wish more people treated sex itself that way. Sex can be passionate, endearing, and loaded with emotional labor, but it doesn't need to be. The act only has as much value as you and the people you perform with assign to it. And if sex is entirely uninteresting to you, the movie can still be a romp because it doesn't force you to sit through any nudity or uncomfortable descriptive language. Plus, there's more than enough wordplay to keep the humor afloat.
I'm sure you know how things are at No ever since you're new now.
I have no way of knowing how things are now at No. I knew how things were at No before now.
Then you should know now at No things are a lot like they are now.
My experience is but one among many. A switch flipped in my brain when Fink made his white girl comment. At that moment, I suddenly realized I had been walking through a town populated exclusively by straight white people, and my mind treated that as normal, as default. I want to think that I wouldn't have found the presence of some Columbia citizens of color to be odd, or that I'd have not given a second thought, but in 2013, would I have? Certainly if the city were full of non-white people, I would have remarked on it. Maybe I'd even have called it unrealistic, as if a game about fighting robots in the sky with magical tonics had any responsibility to be realistic. I felt dirty. I felt like the game was trying to tell me personally something about how I perceive people. Something I needed to hear. What does Bioshock have to do with this? What? It was still on your shelf. Ah. Notice something different about me? That I'm presenting as a woman? Yep, that's it. That's the one thing that's different. Look, you already know why I'm here. Yeah, but I still wish you weren't. Tough shit. Is it because of my mixed feelings? Bingo, and you need to talk about it. You already know I can't do that. If I start bad-mouthing the movie, then nobody's gonna check it out. And if they already like the movie, then my critique is just going to be seen as invalid. But is it invalid? I mean, I don't think so. So why does it matter what people say? Because I don't want my effort to go to waste. If my critique is bad, then there goes the entire episode. So what if a bunch of shitheads don't like it? You're not really doing this for them. You're doing it for the people who give you considerate feedback. And even if your take is hot garbage, where's the harm? There could be a lot of harm. I mean, I think I have a good grasp on what representation should look like, but I'm just a skinny, white, binary person. Who cares what I have to say? You care. It's not like you're trying to preach about what's right and what's wrong definitively. Your experience is but one among many. You're just presenting one possible way to look at the movie and what it might be saying. There's nothing wrong with that. Wouldn't it be dishonest to leave a glowing review of Down with Love that doesn't even mention the parts that made you feel conflicted? I mean, I guess you're right, but what if I say the wrong thing? Then own it. I hope 10 years into YouTube you can tell the difference between when someone's giving you a real good faith analysis and when they aren't. If they're being constructive, then just hear them out. And don't take it personally if there's something that should have been different. You know what? Yeah, I appreciate that. Kendra. She and her? She and her. Cool. Now where was I? Right. Immediately following Fink's white girl comment, you as the player character Booker win a raffle and are given the opportunity to throw a baseball at an interracial couple who have been tied up and surrounded by pointedly racist imagery. Fink and the crowd egg you on, though the game gives you the option of throwing the ball at Fink instead. Bioshock Infinite's narrative and application of player agency is troubling, and there's a hell of a lot of problematic storytelling at play, which I might discuss at a later time. But that intro sequence alone had an impact on me I haven't entirely stopped thinking about since its release. Whenever a fictional world draws me in like Bioshock Infinite, where I find myself gawking at the scenery, enamored by the characters, and wishing to live inside its society, I sometimes have to take a step back and ask, why is everybody white? I have to ask that of Down with Love, too. Why is everybody white? On my most recent viewings, I tried to find any non-white actors, and all I could find were a few in crowd scenes and a couple in a montage where only their hands are visible. Not a single speaking role is given to someone who isn't either white or white passing. And the usual rationalizations for a lack of diversity within a film cast don't really apply. The argument for historical accuracy doesn't really hold up because, for one, the numbers don't match even when you account for the era and for the upper class, and two, Down with Love is a comedy film that's not really concerned with historical accuracy as much as it is being faithful in its aesthetic. And they certainly nail that. Part of the film's bonus content is some behind-the-scenes featurettes wherein the cast and crew gush about how cool and 60s-like all the sets are for much of the featurette's duration. And I couldn't really spot any non-white crew members there either. During one of these featurettes, director Peyton Reed talks about his goal for the movie's look, saying that he was less interested in making the film accurate to the 60s in real life, and more with making his film look like a film from the era.
It's not the New York City of today, and it's not even the New York City of the real early 60s. It's basically New York City in the 60s as seen through a Hollywood movie of that period.
And I think that the whitewashed cast is reflective of that choice, whether intentionally or not. The thing about casting white actors for the sake of historical accuracy, or aesthetic accuracy in this case, is that it especially sucks when the period you're trying to recreate is one of racial injustice. Remember that the 1960s were the peak of the civil rights movement. Discrimination was rampant and obvious, meaning that it was more difficult for people of color, particularly in the United States, to find well-paying work. And that goes double for upper-class work like working as a publisher in New York, or as an on-screen actor in Hollywood, positions that, let's not forget, don't exist in a vacuum, and rely on some level of exploitation in order to create the affluence that they do. It sucks because by focusing your movie-making efforts and your budget on these spaces, you wind up contributing to a major problem in common with that era. The problem being that people of color were essentially denied the opportunity to work on this movie at a level even marginally comparable to that of their white counterparts. This movie in particular doesn't have a sound excuse for that. It's fictional, it's zany, it's over the top, and it disregards a lot of the ideas from the time. There are a lot of post-feminist themes at play, an ideology that certainly wasn't popular in the era, and it goes out of its way to subvert a lot of the classic movie tropes, though certainly not all of them. And it's not just race. Down with Love functions within a strict, binary framework of gender and sexuality. Men like women like men, everyone is cis, others don't exist. And the language of the movie never once acknowledges exceptions, save for a single character whose queerness is implied, not stated, and played for a laugh. And also a few jokes are made at Peter's expense when Vicky accuses him of being a homosexual in denial. Don't go looking for any table scraps of body positivity here either. Showcasing some successful non-straight, non-white characters wouldn't have been unrealistic or break immersion because, again, realism and immersion were never the goal. And even if they were, you have the freedom when you're writing fiction to take creative liberties that serve a real-world ethical purpose. It's disappointing to me that the makers of this film chose not to do that. Though, before we get pedantic, yes, the cast and crew does include some LGBTQ+ folks to a possibly higher degree than it does non-white personnel, but the point stands. At the moment, it may sound like I'm being harsh on this movie over one element of its production, but I think that everything we watch deserves some scrutiny. I'm not here to drag Peyton Reed or anyone else involved with the production of the movie. Hell, it's 20 years old now. If I really wanted to speak out meaningfully against poor representation, I need look no further than movies coming from Hollywood this year. And Peyton Reed's track record with diversity in casting has been at least reasonable throughout his career. His first Hollywood film was 2000's Bring It On, which had lots of cool, strong women of color in lead roles, and I think that that's worth commending to some degree. My earlier praise of the movie isn't hollow. I think it's clever, witty, and I wholeheartedly recommend it still. But Down with Love is a symptom of one of the lingering issues that the civil rights movement couldn't fix, and no future movement for equality can either. We can't alter history, and as long as there's still people willing to look back on history with rose-colored glasses, ignoring all of the harsh realities that came with it, we'll never quite move past those realities. Down with Love wants you to not think about it. It wants you to stroll through the scenery, fall in love with its world, bask in its beauty. But when it comes to the ugly truths necessary for that world to blossom, it'd rather you just look the other way. But your experience is but one among many. Not everyone has the luxury of looking the other way. We can't just ignore the experiences of others simply because we're happy with the one experience that we get to have. In order to show that we love our fellow humans, we need to have empathy. And without empathy, what exactly are we saying about love?